3, go.
This meeting is being recorded.
So, good morning po. We're going to report the Fletcher situation, ethics, and meta-ethics. And I'm going to report together with Crizal J. Morada, Sheena Rose Magana, John Wency Borsong, and Miriam Joy Arcega. Next po. So, before pa tayo mag-start, tingnan po natin yung mga topic outline na itatackle po namin. Next slide po, please. Yan. So, we have two major topics. Tulad po na nabanggit, yung Fletcher situation ethics and meta-ethics. So, under po ng Fletcher situation ethics is yung situation ethics introduction, which is introduction about Fletcher, Joseph Fletcher, how to work out what to do, consigns as a verb, not a noun. And then Fletcher's overall framework, tas under pa po niya is yung four working principles of situationism, which is and then yung next po, last po sa Fletcher is yung the 6 propositions of situation ethics. And then under naman po ng meta-ethics or meta-ethics introduction, meta-ethics theories, and a short description of the key problems faced by certain meta-ethical theories. So mag-proceed na po tayo sa Fletcher situation ethics. Which is also situation ethics introduction. Yan pong photo, yan po yung book niya, yung about dito po sa mga series niya, and din yung principles po niya. And yun po, the new morality. In the introduction of the situation ethics, the new morality, Joseph Fletcher, 1905-1991, develops what he calls an ethical non-system. His book caused a firestorm again amongst the public because it is legitimized the general post-war dissatisfaction with authority. At the time it was written, it seemed to make some radical claims such as that it is not wrong to have an abortion, extramarital sex, to be homosexual, or to have an abortion. All that said, Fletcher's work is not widely discussed nor respected in philosophical circles. It is badly argued, idiosyncratic, and racist old ideas. So, base po dun sa introduction, kung may kita po natin, yung emphasize dun sa it's not wrong to have extramarital sex, to be homosexual, or to have an abortion, which is, alam naman po natin na lahat po siya is against the words of God. So, next slide po, please. Although there is the clothing of religion in the book, Fletcher uses religious terms such as agape, which is, mamaya po is, if further is discussed po yan, and we'll play some video regarding po dito, and cites famous theologians such as Rudolf Bultmann. The central ideas do not rely on the truth of any particular religion, as his argument has nothing special to do with theological faith. So parang ang pinaka-sinasabi nilang po dito is yung lahat po ng ginagawa natin, which is we all have freedom to do anything that we want to do. Kaya po yun, mamaya po, ang sinasabi niya po dito is the only way to God is by means of salvation. And later po, ma-discuss po siya further. Fletcher's work is an attempt to show how acts can be morally acceptable if they go against so-called moral laws. And Fletcher also says that Jesus' act is morally acceptable despite going against the Jewish law because he acted to bring about the most love. So dito po, parang you can do anything para po sa pangalan ng pag-ibig. Yeah, sounds weird. Cringe. But next po. And how to work out what to do. Consigns as a verb, not a noun. Fletcher says consigns is not a noun. Consigns is not the name of an internal faculty, nor is it a sort of internal moral compass. This is how people typically think of consigns. and it is often portrayed in cartoons with the devil and an angel sitting on someone's shoulder whispering into her ears. Kung naalala niyo po yung sa Tom and Jerry, yung may nagsasalita sa kabila na gawin mo to, gawin niya yan, tapos sa kabila naman huwag kasi kasasama yan, there are some consequences na pwedeng mangyari. Tapos yun po, so rather yung example, yun sa yun po, example po yan. So rather for Fletcher, conscience is a verb. Imagine we have heard some bullies laughing because they have sent our friend some offensive text, and we are trying to decide whether or not to check his phone to delete the text before he does. The old noun view of conscience would get us to think about this in the abstract, perhaps reason about it, or ask for guidance from the Holy Spirit, a guardian angel, etc. According to Fletcher, this is wrong. Instead, we need to be in the situation and experience the situation. We need to be doing, hence verb the experiencing. Maybe we might conclude that it is right to go into our friend's phone. Maybe we will not, but whatever happens, the outcome could not have been known beforehand. What our conscience would have us to do to reveal what we live in the world and not through armchair reflection. So, ibig sabihin po, so basically, ang pinakasasabi niya, dapat ikaw mismo yung nasa sitwasyon para malaman mo yung about dun sa consumption na yun. Yun po. Next na lang po. So, Fletcher's overall framework, Fletcher says there are two unattractive views in ethics, which are legalism and antinomianism, and one attractive view which sits in between them, situationism. So, legalism, someone who is following the system of legalism is someone who blindly observes moral rules without being sensitive to the situation. Fletcher has in mind a simple-minded deontologist who holds that actions are right and wrong irrespective of the consequences. For example, we ought to tell the truth in all situations, even if it means that, say, millions of people die. So, it's a bit, hindi pala, ang dark niya. Kasi, kasi meron naman tayong tinatawag na white lies. Pero itong situation na to, you have no choice. Parang gusto mo lang is sabihin mo yung totoo. Which is, we have white lies na kung alam mo naman na maraming tao yung mamamatay sa ngalan ng pagsabi ng totoo, iisipin mo na hindi mo na lang sasabihin yung totoo. Kasi we all know that every lives matter. So, meron pa po ditong isang example na nung during 2022, ito pong example na to. The religious police of Saudi Arabia refused to let a group of girls escape from a burning building. Bakit? Kasi inappropriate yung suot nila, which was against the will of Allah. And then, one witness said he saw 3 policemen beating young girls to prevent them from leaving the school because they were not wearing the abaya. That's why 15 girls died. So, yan po. Dahil po we all know na Saudi Arabia is mostly is Islam, and meron silang sinusunod na mga yung sa mga suotin na sobrang strict nila. Yun po, mas inisip nila yung ganun kasi nasa Bible nila yan. Yung Allah po is yung Allah po is, which is yung sinasamba is yung yung Biblia po nila is Quran, which is nakasulat sa Bible. Yan po. And then yung next po, pero kung dark ito, mas medyo parehas lang pala. Yung antinomianism, the other extreme is antinomianism, anti-meaning against nominalism, meaning law. Fletcher calls this an existential view because it is one that says that people are always free to choose what they want. Antinomianism means the moral agent is erratic and random, is unpredictable, and any decisions taken are ad hoc. Dito po, may nabasa rin ako dito na dahil nabanggit nga dito na people are free to do what they want. Even if you want to take drugs, okay lang dito. Kasi tulad ng sabi ko kanina, papatawarin ka naman ni God by means of salvation. That's why you can do anything that you want to do. Kahit, yun nga, kahit labag siya. Pero, yun. Next na lang po. Situationism, yung last po dito sa Fletcher's overall framework. Fletcher's one moral law is that we ought to always act so as to bring out the most love for the most people. Ito po yung agape calculus na sinasabi ng kanina. Fletcher's situationism is then a theological theory. It is directed to the consequences that would determine whether an action is right or wrong. So, yun po yung consequences. For example, a situation might arise where the child of a terrorist would have to be murdered in order to get information to stop a nuclear attack. Fletcher would say that here is a situation which is where we ought to not to follow the principle, do not murder, but rather do the most loving thing, which in this case turned out to be murder. From the universal law, we can only derive principles, not other universal principles. As Fletcher puts it, we cannot milk a universal from a universal. This means that for Fletcher, it might on occasions be morally acceptable to break the Ten Commandments. In fact, he says something stronger that in some situations it is our duty to break these commandments. He thinks that there are four working principles of situationism, which ito pong four principles ng situationism will be discussed by Sheena Rose Magana po.
The four working principles of situationism. First is positivism. So Fletcher's use of positivism is not the philosophical idea with the same name, but rather is where any moral or value judgment in ethics, like a theologian's faith propositions, is a decision, not a conclusion. It is a choice, not a result reached by force of logic. So when challenged as to how he can justify that the only law is to maximize love, Fletcher will say that he cannot. It is not a result of logic or reasoning, rather it is a decision to take. It's like the theologian faith. So if we will compare it to a research, it is more on qualitative, which is more on opinion, observation, not objectives, not more on fact. Next is personalism. Love is something that is experienced by people. So everyone experiences love. So personalism is the view that we are to maximize love. We need to consider the person in a situation. The who of a situation. So ito po is yung mismong tao. The summing up, this Fletcher say, love is of people, by people, and for people. Things are to be used, people are to be loved. Loving actions are the only conduct permissible. So, dito po sa personalism, love is more on the person that is involved. So, ang mga bagay po ay gagamitin. Ang mga tao ay minamahal. So, ang pinaka-focus po ng love according to personalism is on the people itself. Next slide. Next is pragmatism. Fletcher does not want his jury to reject all the implications of this type of pragmatism. What makes his view pragmatic is very simple. It is just his attraction to moral views, which do not try to work out what to do in the abstract, but rather explore how moral views might play out in the different real life situations. So basically, this is more on realistic. It is not. It does not focus on theoretical. So we can highlight these real life situations. Next is relativism. Fletcher is a relativist in the sense that what is right or wrong is related to the situation we are in. If situations vary, then consequences vary, and what we ought to do will change accordingly. So according to relativism po, we will say that the action is right or wrong based on a situation. So ang pinaka-example po dito is self-defense po. So masasabi natin na tama yung ginawa niya based sa situation. So yun po. Next is the video presentation of the principles.
This meeting is being recorded.
Joseph Fletcher maintains in situationism work principles. This theory only these principles. These are not rules. Instead, they are an explanation of what it means to apply agape, love, to a moral dilemma. Four principles: relativism and personalism. There's no clear acronym possible here in terms of remembering them and revising them, but if you notice, there are 3 P's and an R, and this should hopefully prompt you into successfully remembering them. Pragmatism. This means practical. It's no good expecting someone to serve love if the action associated is impossible to do. It must be possible to bring about love as a result of the action you perform. Fletcher himself said, to be correct or right, a thought or action must work. The second principle is relativism. Rules are useful and generally good, but they don't always apply. A right or wrong action might be different for different people, and we've got to be prepared to weigh up the situation. Situation ethics does not look at unique situations and derive general rules. Instead, it looks at the general rules and tries to see what would best apply to the situation. Positivism. Now, you need to be careful here. So many people define this term wrong. It is not necessarily what it sounds like, so learn this properly. Theological Positivism, which is what we're talking about here, claims that one must have faith first. In this case, you've got to have faith that love is the right or good thing. You can't reason that love is the best thing. There's no way of demonstrating or proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that love is the best thing to do. We just have to trust that and accept it. However, once we have accepted that, reason can then be applied to love to show us how to be loving in each situation. So positivism means faith first and then reason second. Fletcher says, only love is constant. Everything else is variable. But we have to trust that that is the case. We can't do anything more. We can add to this that faith, according to Fletcher, is working through love, and that this is the essence and pith of Christian ethics. For him, Christian ethics, true Christian ethics, is love, and that's all it is about. To really be a moral Christian, you must show love first and foremost before anything else. Finally then, personalism. For Fletcher, people come first before the law. This is a person-centered theory, and always people should come first. This follows the biblical New Testament idea that the laws are made to help humans. Humans weren't made purely to obey the laws. Instead, we need to work out who needs help and see if the law provides with the ability to do that. If it doesn't work, it should be set aside for the sake of love for that individual person. So the legalist asks, what am I supposed to do? But the situationist asks, who should I help?
Now we are here in the 6 propositions of situation ethics, which we will discuss one by one. Next slide, please. So the first one is only one thing is intrinsically good, namely love, nothing else at all. There is one thing which is intrinsically good, that is good irrespective of context, mainly love. If love is what is good, then an action is right or wrong in as far as it brings out the most amount of love. So, yun po, basically, when we are in love, sometimes um, we doesn't determine what is really right and wrong. So, kapag love, it if it is more on love po, sometimes you will see it as good, but the majority or the others will see it as wrong po. Next, number 2, the ruling norm of Christian decision is love, nothing else. In the Christian context, agape is the type of love which manifests in how God relates to us. Consider Christ's love in saying that he forgave those carrying out his execution, or consider a more modern example. In February 1993, Mrs. Johnson's son, Laramune Bird, 20 years old, was shot in the head by 16-year-old Osea Israel after an argument at a party in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Mrs. Johnson subsequently forgave his son's killer, and after he had served a 17-year sentence for the crime, asked him to move in next door to her. She was not condoning his actions, nor will she ever forget the horror of those actions. But she does love her son's killer. That love is agape. So we may not forget what really happened, but because of love, we can forgive. Next slide. Number 3, love and justice are the same. For justice is love distributed, nothing else. To act justly or fairly is precisely to act in love. Love is justice. Justice is love. So it is justice. Number 4, well, love wills the neighbor's good when we like him or not. This is self-explanatory. As we noted above, agape is in the business of loving the unlovable. So related to our enemies, Christian love does not ask us to lose or abandon our sense of good and evil, or even of superior and inferior. It simply insists that however we rate them, and whether we like them or not, they are our neighbors and are to be loved. So, ito po ay um, for it says po na forgiving does not really that wrong po. So next is the 5th propositions of situation ethics. Only the ends justify the means, nothing else. In direct rejection of the deontological approaches, Fletcher says that any action we take as considered as an action independent of its consequences is literally meaningless and pointless. An action such as telling the truth only acquires its status as a means by virtue of an end beyond itself. So, highlighting this statement, an action independent of its consequences is literally meaningless and pointless, which means every decision we we make, every action we take, um, there's always a result, which can be considered as consequences if does affect your life negatively. The last proposition of situation ethics is love's decisions are made situationally, not descriptively. Ethical decisions are not cut and dried most of the time, and they exist in a gray area. No decision can be taken before considering the situation. Fletcher gives the example of a woman in Arizona who learned that she might bear a defective baby because she had taken thalidomide. Yes, thalidomide. What should she do? The loving decision was not one given by the law, which stated that all abortions are wrong. However, she traveled to Sweden where she had an abortion. Even if the embryo had not been defective according to Fletcher, her actions were brave and responsible and right because she was acting in light of the particulars of the situation so as to bring about the most love. So, same po, this is same to the relativism which um, the action can be considered right or wrong depends on the situation po. That's it for the sixth proposition of situation X. Next presenter, please.
For meta-ethics, next slide po. Meta-ethics refers to the nature of ethical terms and concepts and to the attempt to understand the underlying assumptions behind moral theories. Therefore, it is the branch of ethics that seeks to understand the nature of ethical properties, statements, attitudes, and judgment. It covers a broad range of questions surrounding how we know what moral truth is, and even if moral truth exists, and how we learn about moral facts. Meta-ethics is a major field of inquiry in philosophy. Meta-ethics is the attempt to answer questions about ethics. Philosophers working in this area are not so much concerned with what people or acts in particular are ethical. These questions are the domain of an allied field of inquiry known as normative ethics. So, ang sabi po dito, ang meta-ethics daw po ay nature siya ng mga ethical terms and concept na nag-a-attempt na maintindihan yung mga assumptions behind sa moral theories. So, therefore, ang meta-ethics ay isang branch ng ethics ah, na naglalayon maintindihan yung nature ng ethical properties, yung statements, attitudes, and judgments. So, malaki po yung kino-cover niyang range ng questions na sa paligid natin or kung paano natin gaano kaalam kung ano ang moral truth and kung and if nag-e-exist ba ito and kung ano kung paano tayo matututo sa moral facts. So, sinasabi din po dito na ang meta-ethics ay inquiry siya ng philosophy. Yung word na meta sa meta-ethics ay nagsisignify ng above or mataas, gano'n. Sa Next slide. Next slide po. For the ethics theories, number one is the moral naturalism. In it states moral facts are ordinary facts of the same physical reality described by scientists, biology, psychology, and physics. And we know about these facts through observation. Many naturalists think that we can observe moral facts because they are identical to other natural facts. For example, faith and intrinsic badness could be identical, two ways to see the same thing. Philosophers argue that scientists discovered that water and H2O are identical, and we can discover that pain and intrinsic badness are the same thing in a similar way. So, sabi po dito, ang moral naturalism daw, sabi dito, ay moral fact siya, that moral facts ay isang ordinary facts lang din na may same na physical na reality na dinidescribe ng mga scientists. Kumbaga, ano po, may isang bagay lang na dinidescribe pero parang magkaiba sa dalawang tao magkaibang dating sa kanila. Sabi nga po dito sa example, yung philosophers nag-a-argue sila na ang na-discover ng scientists na water at H2O ay identical. It is because, kumbaga, kung hindi po tayo, for example, sa mga bata na hindi pa marunong about sa science masyado, hindi nila alam na yung H2O and water ay iisa. Ganun po siya. May isa pa po akong example dito ng naturalism. Example of naturalistic ethical theory. An example of a naturalistic ethical theory is John Stuart Mill's version of utilitarianism, according to which action is morally right to the extent that it tends to produce happiness, and morally wrong to the extent that it fails to produce happiness or tends to produce unhappiness. Next is the moral intuitionism. For moral intuitionists, also known as moral non-naturalists, think that observation is insufficient to explain all of our moral knowledge, and at least some of our moral knowledge is based on intuition or contemplation that enables us to know self-evident facts. Once we fully understand a moral statement, that can be enough to know if it's true. So, sabi naman po dito sa moral intuitionism, tinatawag rin siyang moral non-naturalist. Sabi po dito, ang observation ay insufficient or kulang siya para ma-explain ang mga moral knowledge and yung mga yung iba pang moral knowledge na base sa intuition natin na ang Tagalog ng enables na parang nag-aano siya sa atin na malaman natin yung mga self-evident facts. Tas pag naintindihan na po natin yung moral statement, enough na siya para malaman natin yung totoo. Parang Ang example po nito ay yung sa mga halimbawa sa mga babae. Pag may mga boyfriend po sila ta's parang pinaghihinilaan nila yung boyfriend nila gano'n, na may ginawang mali gano'n. Kumbaga hindi pa nila nakikita or alam na may ginawang gano'n yung boyfriend nila, pero sa intuition nila meron na agad. Kumbaga nararamdaman tapos mako-confirm lang po nila yun kapag nagkaroon ng pinaka-evidence. Yun lang po.
So the next meta-ethics theories is the Emotivism. So Emotivism is a form of non-cognitivism because it claims that moral judgments aren't ultimately meant to be true or false. Instead, moral judgments are expression of our emotions, and moral arguments are meant to change someone's emotional attitudes towards certain moral judgment. Not everything we say is true or false, such as wow or do your job. So, um, also, this ethical theory says that the moral statement are just expression of feelings and or emotion. Also, the statement of this ethical theory is cannot be proved true or false, and therefore objective moral laws do not exist. So example na lang is yung expression ng speaker about moral issue and moral statement may influence yung another person, yung thoughts and conduct ng um, person na nakarinig. So yun yung motivism. Next is the moral relativism. So it is a view that moral statements can be true or false, but the truth of a moral statement depends on the moral tradition of the person who is uttering it. Why? Because morality is based on a culture, social contract, or constructed tradition. All moral statements are made within a tradition, and the statements are true if they correspond to the tradition. One culture could say that example is one culture could say that lying is always wrong, and another could say it's only wrong sometimes. Moral relativists reduce morality to empirically variable customs and tradition that can be studied by anthropologists. Also, to further na expound natin yung moral relativism. Also, the idea of this meta-ethics is that all society should accept each other's differing moral values, given that there are no universal moral principle. So, example of moral relativism or moral, is if a person believes that abortion is morally wrong, then it is wrong for her. Kung sino yung nagsabi na um, he or she na believes that the abortion is wrong. Also, example ko na lang din dito sa Philippines that we do not cease to debate on the moral acceptability of contraceptives, and also abortion is prohibited. But in another countries, abortion is perfectly normal, and more so the use of artificial contraceptives. So, yun po yung next is the last meta-ethics theories is the error theory. So, in this theory, it states that all ordinary moral judgment are false. But murder is wrong and murder is not wrong. Are false because nothing is morally wrong. Moral wrongness is non-existent, just like unicorns, and all statements about things being morally wrong are false for the same reason that they are false about unicorns. So, error theories agrees that when we speak about morality, we often intend to say something true or false and refer to moral facts, but they they think all moral concepts fail to refer to anything because there are no moral facts. There is no such thing as right or wrong, good or bad, virtue or intrinsic value. So in error theory, judgment is cognitive. However, there are no objective moral properties. All moral judgment are false. So example is the statement of murder is wrong is false, and also the statement murder is right are also false. So another example is fairies are not true. So also they are not false. So ganun lang din po yung sa error theory. So next po.
For the short description of the key problems faced by the certain meta-ethical theories. First one is Auth Policy. This fallacy is variously known as Hume's law and Hume's guillotine and derives from David Hume's injunction that statements about what ought to be cannot be derived from descriptive premises alone without the inclusion of a moral premise or assumption. So, in other words, Auth fallacy is an assumption is made that because things are in certain way or they should be that way. For example, um, why do people argue about abortion is moral? It's legal, isn't it? For some people, abortion is illegal, yet medicine propose its legality for some reason. Like, if halimbawa may complication yung baby sa loob ng siya ng mommy. Halimbawa, mas mapapahirap yung buhay niya kapag pinilit siyang palakihin. Kaya, mas propose ng doctor na yung abortion. So, it's legal. Auth fallacy. Next is the Naturalistic Policy. This fallacy gets its name from the supposed errors exposed by a G.E. Morse. Open question argument. More argued that in taking any natural property such as gives pleasure or produces taking a natural property such as gives pleasure or it is always an open question whether that property is good. More concluded that it is therefore a fallacy to define ethical terms such as good in terms of such natural qualities. Yeah. Naturalistic fallacy. If something is natural, it must be good. For example, breastfeeding is a natural way to feed children. Ever since naman na kinalikahan natin, naturally speaking, breastfeeding is good. Di ba sinasabi ng mga magulang na mas healthy yung breastfeeding kaysa din sa mga bottled or yung powdered milk. Kasi yung nutrients daw is mas okay. So, naturally, breastfeeding is good. Next is motivation to act ethically. The problem of motivation is faced by meta-ethical theories that interpret moral utterance as propositions about speaker-independent facts. The problem arises in that such theories must explain how it is that we are inextricably motivated to want the good. It makes no sense for a speaker to say, for example, charity is good and I am not for charitable giving at all, at one and at the same time. Next is moral conscience. The problem of moral quandary and guilt is faced by meta-ethical theories that interpret moral utterances as principally expressions of speakers' attitudes or preference. If moral utterance is essentially expressions of the speaker's positive or negative attitude to something, then how it is that the attitudes, the occurrence of moral indecision that conflicts with the desire. For example, I want to go to the dance, but should I stay and look after my sick father? So parang conscious guilt or yung guilt ang mas nananaig para mas gumawa ka ng mabuti. And it requires explanation. Next is Euthyphro dilemma. The name of this dilemma is inspired by Socrates' question to Plato's character. Socrates asked Euthyphro, is the Phaeus loved by the gods because it is Phaeus? Or is it Phaeus because it is loved by the gods? Translated into modern terminology, the horns of the dilemma are these. If God loves the good because it is good, then goodness is independent of God's preferences. This option includes the major premises of divine command theory. On the other hand, if the good is good because God loves it, then to say that God is good is to say viciously that God loves God. This second option also makes the attribution of goodness to particular people and things result of the arbitrary act of God. So, dito naman sa dilemma na to, nakafocus siya kung ano yung okay para kay God. I mean, ano yung dapat nating paniwalaan na good because God says it ganun po. So, next is may papanood kaming video about meta-ethical theory.
Is it wrong to steal to feed your family? Is there such a thing as a good lie? Questions like these are the domain of ethics, the branch of philosophy that studies morality, or right and wrong behavior. But before we can parse questions like these, we need to go deeper into metaethics, which studies the very foundations of morality itself. Metaethics asks questions as basic as what is morality? What's its nature? Like, is it an objective thing out there in the world waiting to be known? Or is it more like a preference, an opinion, or just a bunch of cultural conventions? There are a lot of different metaethical views out there, and one way to understand them is to put them to a test to see how they'd help you solve some thorny ethical problems, like a scenario where you have to steal food or lie for a good cause. Or what about this? What if you set out to harm someone, but you ended up saving their life by accident? Ethics is a kind of science that it seeks to discover moral truths whose existence is testable and provable. But others believe the nature of morality is every bit as subjective as whether you prefer plain M&Ms or peanut. There's just no right answer unless you have a peanut allergy. So you and a friend might totally agree on whether something is immoral or not, but you might disagree fervently about why. For an example of a slippery moral scenario, let's just head straight over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. A burglar plots to break into an old woman's house on a Sunday morning, a time when he knows she's always at church. So one Sunday, he creeps up to her back window and smashes it with a hammer. But after he looks inside, he sees the old woman isn't at church. She's in there, laying face down on the floor. The sight of her body scares the burglar and he runs away. He was down for a little bit of burglary, but getting nabbed for murder was not part of his plan. But what the burglar didn't know was that the woman wasn't dead. She was unconscious, having passed out because of a carbon monoxide leak that would have killed her. When the burglar broke the window, he let out some of the toxic gas and let in fresh air, which allowed her to regain consciousness. So the burglar broke into the house with the intention of stealing from the woman, but inadvertently, he saved her life. Did the burglar do a good thing? Does he deserve praise even though he didn't intend to help the woman? Likewise, does he still deserve blame even though he didn't actually get around to stealing anything and ended up saving the woman's life? Thanks, Thought Bubble. Your answers to these questions will help you suss out where your moral sensibilities lie. And why you answer the way you do will say a lot about what metaethical view you subscribe to. One of the most widely held metaethical views is known as moral realism, the belief that there are moral facts in the same way that there are scientific facts. In this view, any moral proposition can only be true or false. And for a lot of us, our gut intuition tells us that there are moral facts. Some things are just wrong and others are indisputably right. Like, a lot of people think that gratuitous violence is always wrong and nurturing children is always right, no matter what. But you don't have to dig very deep into moral realism before you run into trouble. Like, for one thing, if there are moral facts, where do they come from? How do we know what they are? Are they testable, like scientific facts are? Are they falsifiable? And if morality is based on facts, then why is there so much disagreement about what's moral and what's not, as opposed to science, where there's often more consensus? This is what's known as the grounding problem. The grounding problem of ethics is the search for a foundation for our moral beliefs, something solid that would make them true in a way that is clear, objective, and unmoving. If you can't find a way to ground morality, you might be pushed toward another meta-ethical view, moral anti-realism. This is the belief that moral propositions don't refer to objective features of the world at all, that there are no moral facts. So a moral anti-realist would argue that there's nothing about gratuitous violence that's inherently wrong. Likewise, they'd say, if you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, sometimes nurturing your kids doesn't seem like it's that important. So maybe morality isn't the same for everyone. But still, most people you know, including yourself probably, are committed to some form of moral realism. And there are many forms. So let's familiarize ourselves with some of its most popular flavors. Some moral realists are moral absolutists. Not only do they believe in moral facts, they believe that there are some moral facts that don't change. So for them, if something is wrong, it's wrong regardless of culture or circumstance. Moral facts apply as universally and as constantly as gravity or the speed of light. If moral absolutism sounds too rigid, maybe moral relativism would appeal to you. This view says that more than one moral position on a given topic can be correct. And one of the most common forms of moral relativism is cultural relativism. But there are actually two different things a person might mean when they talk about cultural relativism. The more general kind is descriptive cultural relativism. This is simply the belief that people's moral beliefs differ from culture to culture. No one disputes that. It seems obviously true. Like some cultures believe that capital punishment is morally right, and others believe it is morally wrong, that killing another human is inherently unethical. But there's also normative cultural relativism, which says that it's not our beliefs, but moral facts themselves that differ from culture to culture. So in this view, capital punishment is morally correct in some cultures and morally wrong in others. Here, it's the moral fact of the matter that differs based on culture. Now, normative cultural relativism might sound pretty good to you. It does at first to a lot of people, because it seems like it's all about inclusiveness and tolerance. Who am I to tell other cultures how they should live, right? But this view actually has some pretty big flaws. If every culture is the sole arbiter of what's right for it, that means no culture can actually be wrong. It means Nazi culture actually was right for the people living in that culture. A dissenting German voice in, say, 1940 would have just been wrong if it had claimed that Jewish people deserve to be treated the same as other Germans. And what makes things even weirder is that if normative cultural relativism is true, then the concept of moral progress doesn't make sense either. If what everyone is doing right now is right, relative